that he, in the course of establishing himself as the Mahdi and their guide, etc., because of the Sufi influence, we're not talking about really Islamic knowledge and basing it on the Sunnah, etc. What he started to claim was that he would receive messages directly from Allah. And when he quoted hadiths, he claimed that the Prophet ﷺ came to him and told him these hadiths. So, when others would say, quote the hadiths, that so-and-so said, that so-and-so said, that so-and-so said, that the Prophet said, he would say, he'd quote the hadith saying, the Prophet told me. And he would give his hadith, right? So, and he claimed to be receiving this. Of course, the Prophet was the intercessor, or the intermediary between himself and Allah. Allah would, and then that the Prophet ﷺ had informed him that Jibreel was with him all the time, so he had Jibreel with him. He was seeing the Prophet ﷺ in the waking state. And he also started to modify the Sharia, to suit, because now he was making proclamations. He was receiving revelation directly. So the Sharia was in his hands. He was now making up his own Sharia as he was going along. There was a basic Sharia which was there, and he was making his own additions and modifications. And even the 5 pillars of Islam, he replaced Hajj to Mecca with jihad. Right? He made it jihad, meaning preparing for jihad, preparing oneself. This replaced the pilgrimage to Mecca. And he also authorized the burning of the Islamic texts. All of the classical texts that were there, Bukhari, Muslim, all these things, he authorized them being burnt, as they were supposedly associated with the previous Turk regime. But really what he was doing was cutting off people from the knowledge. Because he now became the source of knowledge. Just like when Rasulullah ﷺ was present, you didn't need any other knowledge. He was the source of knowledge. So he was now putting himself in that place. So, however, shortly after his conquest of Khartoum, he died, and he was replaced by his Khalifa, Abdullah ibn Muhammad. He had appointed 3 individuals who would be his Khalifas, and they continued the struggle and the rule of Sudan until eventually the British sent enough forces, and they, under General Kitchener, defeated the Khalifa, Abdullahi, and they went to the tomb of Muhammad Ahmad and smashed it and took out his bones and threw them in the Nile. And Kitchener kept his his skull, right? Took it back with him. Anyway, the point is that in modern Sudanese politics, you hear of, Bashir, who is the president, and the leader of the opposition is referred to as As-Sadiq Al-Mahdi. He is great-grandson of Muhammad Ahmad. So their family, still has political clout in Sudanese politics. And those who followed his da'wah, etc., who linked themselves still through the same tariqah, you will know them by, actually in the country anyway, not so much maybe outside of the country, but they're the ones who wear the thobe, which has pockets in both the front and the back. You can wear it either way. You can turn it either way, it works. Because they have a pocket in the back and a pocket in the front, right? So there's no back and front. The back is the same as the front. So this is one of the symbols that remains and distinguishes them. If you don't know this, then you just think it's just, hey, this guy's got a pocket in the back of his thobe. But it is a part of their symbols of their movement. Huh? What was the origin of putting the pocket in the back? Well, I guess you didn't have to, I mean, you're preparing for jihad, you don't have time to sit and think, should this is the front of my throat or the back? You just put it on and do your job, right? Anyway, the point is, though, that we can see the difference here. Though they achieved some military success, and it did change the nature of Sudanese society, and paved the way to some degree to Islamic rule ending up, although, because after this period, eventually when the British left, those who took over the rule of the Sudan were communists, and it wasn't until early 1980s that the communist rule was overthrown, right? And initially, when it was overthrown, Sadiq al-Mahdi, people, they came into power, but they were quickly removed and replaced by those who called for the implementation of Sharia. But Sadiq al-Mahdi and his people now, they're opposed to Sharia, the implementation of Sharia, as the law of the land. And of course, the Americans like him, because, the Western powers that don't want Sharia to be implemented there, so, they do give him support in one way or another. To Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. See, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab similarly didn't succeed in establishing that which would last. It took years afterwards before the country became unified under Al Saud. But in his lifetime, his jihad, his struggle was for the implementation of Sharia. And he was himself knowledgeable in the religion. So people benefited. He wrote books, etc., and taught. Whereas in the other case, and similarly, Uthman dan Fodio, also a person who was not after power, he didn't try to change Sharia, he's fully grounded, he taught. When the job was done, he stepped away from it, because he wasn't into being the ruler and the leader and everybody follow me. So he walked away from it. This is something rare. Usually when people gain that power, they, as I say, power corrupts, So he stepped away from it. He had the knowledge, the deen knowledge. But now Muhammad Ahmad is a different case. He doesn't have that real deen background. He has Quran, it's good, mashallah, but Sufism. He was basically under the Sufi teachings, where, you reach certain states where you have special relationships with Allah and all this kind of thing. This is the product. He started to claim direct communication with Allah, or indirect communication with Allah. The Prophet ﷺ became his intermediary. And so with that, then deviation came. Changing the Sharia. Sharia became whatever he told them. There was a basic Sharia there, which is from Islamic law, but then he would make whatever changes here, there, everywhere, as he saw fit. And it was legitimized by his claim to be receiving revelation. So, really, though, Sudanese do hold him in certain esteem, etc., he was a deviant, a heretic, really. Because this claim that he made really took him out of Islam. One could say, okay, the people who followed him and believed him, maybe in ignorance, they have excuse. But he was the one actually telling people this. And he knew better. So it means that those kind of claims take you out of Islam altogether. Like, Mirza Ghulam and the others. So that movement, though militarily it did have a number of successes and it did unify the country to varying degrees, we could say it was a failure. Islamically, it was a failure. So its heritage is a Sufi heritage. And its leaders continue in politics, just trying to gain power. Not interested really in the implementation of Sharia, because that wasn't primary, but only utilizing the connection to the so-called Mahdi of the Sudan, using it as a political weapon, because many people in the Sudan still remember that time fondly. This was a time when the British were defeated, etc., leading, this was like a blow to colonialism in that sense. But really, their confidence and love of the individual is misplaced, because he is somebody who we consider to be hated by Allah. He made false claims, claiming to be the Mahdi, etc., which indicate his deviation. And then furthermore, his own claims to receive revelation took him out of Islam. In the years to follow, in the 80s, after Sharia was implemented by, I think it was about 83 or 84, it was implemented in Sudan under Siwar al-Dhahab. He was the one who first implemented it. And they started to apply the Sharia. And they released from jail people who were jailed prior to that. Then they started to apply the Sharia, informing the population, etc., that they were going to, stone adulterers, cut the hands of thieves, and all this. They're going to apply the Sharia across the board. Alhamdulillah, crime dropped, they said, by over 40% in the Sudan after the implementation of Sharia in the country. And there was an individual there by the name of Mahmoud Taha there, who also claimed he was receiving revelations. They tried him and executed him. So that is the extent of the movements. There are other movements which came up later on, and perhaps if we have time, we'll look at them in other parts of the Muslim world, but they end up now in the 20th century in the struggle against colonialism. If time permits, we'll have a look at some of them, but otherwise, from here on in, from our next session onwards, we'll be looking at the movements of the 20th century. And those, among them, we'll be looking at the Ikhwan Muslimun, one group. We'll look at the Jamaat Tabligh, another major group. We'll look at the so-called Salafi movement. We'll look at Hizb al-Tahrir, and the other major movements which have arisen from them. You could say the Takfiri movements, like Takfir al-Hijra movement, which came up in Egypt, and other similar ones. So with that, we'll close the session for the evening, taking a few questions before we go.
Wasn't there anybody in Sudan at this time?
Brother's question, whether there wasn't anybody in the Sudan who had enough knowledge of Quran and Sunnah to challenge Muhammad Ahmad, etc., and speak out against his call. And well, I don't know of that. In fact, you could say real knowledge, Islamic knowledge, started to take root in the Sudan after a number of Sudanese went north to Egypt, studied there, came under, and they brought Egyptian teachers back down into the Sudan. The process of really developing a scholarship in the Sudan started, and this was really at the beginning of the 20th century.
What about teaching Muslim?
No, because he was offering to help. Uthman Dan Fodio was over in West Africa. I mean, there was a huge body of land in between Chad and all that, between the area where he was and the area where Muhammad Ahmad was, But he offered from the perspective of what he understood, that it was a struggle against rule of the colonials, of the British, etc., which was un-Islamic rule. So he offered from that perspective, not really having detailed knowledge of what was the dawah of Muhammad Ahmad. Okay, brother's question, which is related to the issue of graves in Islam and how graves are treated, etc., which we mentioned earlier. Based on a tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, that he passed by some graves in which he mentioned to the companions that the people in the graves were being punished. And he broke off a twig and put it in both of their graves and said, as long as this remains green, the punishment of those in the grave would be diminished. So from that, people have entered into the practice of putting tree parts or whatever, on graves, thinking that this is going to work for them also. The question is, can we do that? The Prophet ﷺ putting that on the grave and diminishing of the punishment, this is obviously a miracle from Allah for the Prophet ﷺ. He is informed the consequence and he is the one who did it. It's like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came by a woman who had a goat, and he was with a number of his companions, and they wanted to have some milk, but the goat's teats were empty. The woman informed him. So he passed his hand on it, rubbed it, it filled up with milk, and he had the milk in a bowl, fed everybody, and gave back to the woman. And she said from that time onwards, the udders of her goat were always full. Can we do that? No. This is something special to Rasulullah ﷺ, I mean, Allah blessed him in that way, that he did certain miraculous acts, which were for his time. And that miracle we believe in without seeing it, because the goat's not around anymore, right? We just believe it. It was narrated to us, just like we believe that Prophet Isa called the dead back to life. We don't have a dead person around till today, right? So those miracles were miracles in the times of those prophets to convince the people that they were prophets of Allah. So we don't build anything, we don't deduce anything from those miracles in terms of our practice today. Similar to that, more similar to that, is the case of the woman who came to the Prophet ﷺ and complained that she had an adopted son who had grown up, and now she had to cover in front of him in the home. And it was problematic for her having to cover all the time. So he told her to give him some of your milk, and he will become your foster child, and you don't have to cover anymore. Now, we know from the Prophet ﷺ's teachings that fosterage, breastfeeding is only within the first 2 years, right? And that's when the child has not started eating solid foods as their main meal. So what about this? That's special to the Prophet ﷺ. That was special circumstance, and it's limited to that circumstance. We don't try to apply that today. You don't put anything on the grave. You may put a marker so it be known where the grave is, some kind of a marker, a rock, slab, something like this, but you shouldn't build any structures over the grave. Plant it, no. Planting plants there, no.
Many people put water on top of it.
Well, it depends. Rose water. Well, it depends on what is the idea behind it. What is the idea behind pouring the rose water on the grave? If you think if it just makes that area smell better, fine, no problem. If it is an issue of you thinking somehow the person in the grave is going to benefit from it, then you have a problem. Now you're entered into some kind of innovation.
What about we shouldn't even water the grave?
No, I didn't say no. If you water the grave to just keep the dust down because the area is a dusty area, just to keep the dust, okay, no harm. For it to help to settle, no harm.
No, if you have a close family, that's okay.
You're cleaning up the area, fine. But watering it, meaning that you come in watering what? Watering the plants that are growing on it? No.
There's no plants on it, but you're just watering it.
Why you water it?
That's what I'm asking.
Well, this is what you have to ask. Why are you watering it? And if the intention is one which is unacceptable Islamically, we say it's wrong. If the intention is okay, Islamically we say it's okay, no problem.
What about salam on the grave, like salam on the grave of Prophet?
What do you mean by salam on the grave?
Like so this salam on...
There is general dua which the Prophet ﷺ taught that you make for the people of the grave. But specifically to go to the grave of those people and then greet them in the grave. We don't really have basis for it. Yes, the general dua for the graveyard. You can make dua for the person in the grave, fine.
You were saying that.
Yeah, it's a general one. Assalamu alaikum ahl al-kuburi min al-mu'minin wal-muslimin. This dua which the Prophet ﷺ taught, that Aisha asked, what should we say when we go to the graves? And he taught her that dua. So that's the one we use. Yes, you can. The earth to eat the bodies of the prophets. Okay, we're entering into questions concerning the people of the grave. Do they, the Prophet ﷺ, is he alive in his grave? Some people hold this belief that he's alive, he didn't die. Of course, we say this is false. No, the idea of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that the earth is forbidden to eat the bodies of the prophets. That's just eating the bodies. That doesn't say anything about being alive or not alive. That's just eating the bodies. They're eating the flesh. The issue of the martyrs, where Allah says in the Quran that don't say that they're dead, they're alive with your Lord. This is in a figurative sense. This is not a literal sense. Because if they weren't dead, why did you put them in the grave in the first place? They are dead. If the Prophet ﷺ wasn't dead, why did they put him in a grave? They washed his body, shrouded it, and put it in a grave. Why? You would say that the Sahaba did a big mistake. If he's alive, they buried a live man. Right? So this is all nonsense. So the point that the Prophet ﷺ had said that whenever salams is given, that Allah has the angel bring back his spirit, and he hears the salams and returns the salams. This is something which the Prophet ﷺ did inform us of. The Prophet ﷺ had said that whenever salams is given, that Allah has the angel bring back his spirit, and he hears the salams and returns the salams. This is something which the Prophet ﷺ did inform us of. That was unique to himself. Now, people who go and then make analogy, qiyas on that, saying, well, there is somebody saying, Salaam alaikum, Ya Rasulullah, or Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, somewhere on the earth every second. So it means that his spirit is there all the time. We don't enter into that. That is the area of the unseen. And if it were a question that his spirit is there all the time, then the Prophet ﷺ would have said it. It's not. He's not alive. Okay, brother said that the Mahdi was supposed to have been a Sufi. Not supposed to have been, he was. He was a Sufi sheikh. And that the Sufis are against armed struggle. No, it's not true. To say the Sufis against armed struggle is not true. No, you have some among them who were involved in armed struggle. The Sanusiya, in the Sanusi movement in North Africa, was a Sufi movement which was involved in direct struggle with the Italian, colonialists. Fought them, died.
You mean Imam Mahdi?
Yeah. He came from that struggle. But the Idrisi Sufi order was the origin of that struggle.
So they're always into peace, power.
No, you have that. They have a main element like that, but that doesn't cancel the other element that may be involved in jihad, fighting, etc. I mean, it's just like the same thing people say, well, Jamaat Tabligh, Jamaat Tabligh, these are people who are shy away from all this, but it is their schools that produce the Taliban. So that's why even some countries, they say, no, this Jamaat Tabligh, these guys are terrorists too. They put them in the list also. So, it's not just, you can't make a blanket statement about, who is from jihad, who is not from jihad, really.
But a lot of the Sufi
It's true. Many Sufi sheikhs of our time, preached against jihad, and this is why the colonial powers liked them, supported them, gave them positions, because of the fact that they discourage people from fighting against colonial rule. Okay.
Are Baha'is same as Ahmadiyas?
Are the Baha'is same as the Ahmadis? No. Baha'is do have their own prophet, one who claimed prophethood, Baha'u'llah, and they represent you could say, a deviant sect which broke off from 12-verse Shiaism, whereas the Ahmadis are a deviant sect which broke off from Sunni Islam. A soft copy of the notes. Yeah. We can have that sent out to all the students, inshallah. These which are outside of the material the main material.